What happens when a woman discovers her husband's betrayal while the whole world is watching? In a room drenched in wealth and illusion, one woman stood on the edge of heartbreak, and something more. The crystal atrium sparkled beneath the cascade of golden chandeliers, each one scattering light like shattered stars. Laughter rippled through the crowd, blending with the soft clink of crystal glasses and murmured conversations. It was a night meant for elegance, appearances, and power. At the edge of the marble-topped bar stood Clara Whitmore, her fingertips gently circling the rim of her wineglass. The deep sapphire of her gown shimmered under the lights, hugging her silhouette with quiet sophistication. She had always known how to drift through these soirees, unnoticed, watching, listening, blending in, but tonight felt off. There was a strange current in the air, almost imperceptible, but she felt it. Then it began hushed whispers, traveling like wildfire across the grand hall, subtle at first, then growing louder like an approaching storm. Clara didn't flinch. Years of reporting on scandals had taught her how to keep a mask firmly in place. But her heart was pounding, and then she saw him, Nathaniel Voss, her husband, her anchor, her greatest vulnerability. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Isla Monroe, the headline-chasing socialite whose name was often whispered with raised brows and knowing looks. Her crimson gown clung to her body, like temptation itself, a brazen counter to Clara's understated grace. The flicker of flashbulbs trailed them as they stepped into the ballroom, capturing every smirk, every step, every betrayal. Nathaniel wore his charm like armor, his smile polished, effortless. That signature arrogance was still intact, perhaps even more amplified by the spectacle he had orchestrated. Clara's breath hitched, but she steadied herself, heels rooted to the floor as if anchoring her dignity. She had chronicled the fall of many, but now she was the subject. The pain burned, but it was the public humiliation that pierced deepest. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a spectacle, a perfectly staged humiliation crafted by the man who once promised her the world. A waiter drifted by, offering a fresh glass of champagne. Clara waved him off with a slight shake of the head, her expression a mask of serenity, forged from years navigating the sharp edges of high society. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a storm. Across the room, Nathaniel finally locked eyes with her. For a heartbeat, his expression flickered. Was it remorse? Doubt? No, it was satisfaction. He wanted her to break. Instead, Clara stepped forward, her chin high, voice smooth as glass Nathaniel. The room fell silent, and Isla's lips curled into a smile painted in poison. Isla's perfectly polished hand rested on Nathaniel's arm, her fingers curled with quiet possession. But Clara didn't spare her a glance. Her gaze stayed fixed on the man she once called home. Nathaniel looked down at her with the same effortless arrogance he wore like a tailored suit, as if this was a minor inconvenience, something he could smooth over. With a charming smirk and a few practiced lines. "Clara," he drawled, condescension coating his words, "you look radiant tonight." Clara's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you look exactly as I expected." Her words were soft, too soft, but they sliced through his facade like a blade in silk. For a brief moment, a flicker of irritation danced across Nathaniel's face, but it vanished almost as quickly as it came. "Come now, darling," he said, voice low but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Let's not turn this into a scene." A scene, that's what he thought she would create? How little he knew her. Clara leaned in just slightly, her voice honeyed with venom. "I wouldn't dare." She turned without waiting for a reply, her steps deliberate, graceful, commanding attention with every movement. She could feel their stares burning into her back. But she didn't let it show, not the pain, not the rage. especially not the heartbreak. Once beyond the crowd, she ducked into a dim hallway just off the ballroom. Alone, finally, she let the facade crack, her chest rose with a sharp breath, her back pressed to the cold marble wall. The music and laughter still echoed from the grand hall behind her, but it sounded far away now, muted by the storm churning inside her. Later that night, in the silence of their penthouse, Clara stood alone. She dropped her clutch onto the black marble countertop and walked to the towering windows that framed the glittering city below. The skyline of New York stretched into the horizon, cold, distant, beautiful. But tonight, the lights brought no comfort. They only reflected the void inside her. Her thoughts spiraled through memories, through moments of shared toasts, whispered dreams, carefully curated lies. She saw herself waiting by the door, again and again, forgiving the excuses, swallowing the doubt, and now this, public, cruel, final. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Nathaniel thought the story ended here, that this was his grand finale. But he'd forgotten who Clara Whitmore was. She was more than a wife. She was a journalist, a seeker of truth. And tonight, she had everything she needed to begin again, not with emotion, but with facts, with truth. Crossing the room, Clara sat at her desk. The laptop's glow lit her face as she began to type, swift, precise, focused. Every memory became a lead. Every suspicious detail he thought she missed, she hadn't. She'd ignored them once, out of love, out of hope, but not anymore. Line by line, the foundation of something far bigger took shape, not just a story of betrayal, a reckoning. Nathaniel Voss would soon learn that he hadn't just embarrassed his wife, he'd armed her, and she was about to set everything on fire with truth as her flame. The pale glow of Clara's laptop cast soft shadows across the room. She sat motionless at her desk, eyes fixed on the words she had just written. The blinking cursor at the end of the sentence mirrored the unrest inside her constant, pulsing, waiting for the next move. Outside the towering windows, New York pulsed with late-night energy. But inside, a storm brewed, one that had been building long before tonight's humiliation ever reached its boiling point. Clara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, exhaling a long, trembling breath. Her mind drifted back to the beginning. There was a time when she truly believed that Nathaniel Voss was her happy ending, a self-made visionary, brilliant, magnetic, unstoppable. She had been drawn to his drive, his charm, the way he made her feel like the center of his universe. But now, as her eyes landed on a photo of them on the mantel, him in a tux, her in white, both smiling, into the flash, all she could see were the cracks that had always been there, hiding behind the polish. Clara had spent her career uncovering uncomfortable truths, pulling masks off powerful people, and laying bare what others tried to hide. And yet, when it came to her own life, she had chosen to believe the illusion. She had excused the late nights, the clipped responses, the emotional withdrawal. She had called it stress, a phase, a necessary sacrifice. But deep down, she had known. It wasn't just the scent of someone else's perfume clinging to his collar. It wasn't the guilt that sometimes flashed in his eyes before it was buried under that practiced grin. It was how he stopped seeing her as a partner and started treating her like a perfectly posed accessory, a piece of his brand, a woman who looked good on his arm but was expected to keep quiet and smile. She remembered their first red carpet event as husband and wife, the flashbulbs, the whispered, "You look breathtaking" in her ear. She had believed every word, believed in him, in them. But now, looking back, it all felt hollow, like lines rehearsed for a performance she didn't know she was cast in. Her thoughts turned, inevitably, to Isla Munro, The younger woman was everything Clara wasn't: loud, uninhibited, unapologetic. Nathaniel was drawn to that kind of attention, the easy kind, the surface-level adoration that didn't ask for depth, and Isla handed it to him, over and over, with a smile that knew exactly what it was doing. Clara had heard whispers for months, snide comments at galas, sidelong glances from people she once called friends. She told herself it wasn't true, that Nathaniel would never risk it all, that he knew better. She had been wrong. Tonight proved that. And in that moment, watching him parade Isla like a trophy, Clara felt something shift inside her. Something cold, final. Nathaniel didn't fear consequences. He had built his empire on ruthless decisions, and now he had applied the same playbook to his marriage. He thought she would stay quiet, preserve the brand, play the role of the dignified, discarded wife. But he had underestimated her. Clara turned her attention back to her laptop. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, steady now. She had spent the last few months quietly digging into a story involving high-level corporate corruption. A story with threads that, at first, she hadn't wanted to follow. But now she was ready. Not just to expose Nathaniel's betrayal, but everything he had built, every lie, every shady deal, every piece of power gained at someone else's cost. Because Clara Whitmore wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a woman with receipts, and she had just found her headline. She had spent years unraveling the secrets of powerful men, exposing their hidden agendas in boardrooms and backrooms. But she never imagined the most devastating scandal she'd ever uncover would begin in her own home. In the quiet hours of the night, Clara Whitmore sat alone, surrounded by spreadsheets and encrypted files, documents she had quietly compiled during months of casual curiosity and deeper suspicion. At first, she thought she was chasing shadows, a few financial inconsistencies, missing names, odd transactions, but the deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Nathaniel Voss wasn't just hiding an affair, he was hiding an empire built on deception. She remembered a recent conversation with Nathan Cole, her longtime investigative partner, a quiet coffee shop, their usual corner booth, laughter, masking the tension in his voice. He had mentioned whispers, rumors of illegal offshore accounts, of ghost partnerships linked to Voss Global. Back then, she brushed it off. She wasn't ready to believe it, not of the man she had once called her everything. But now she couldn't afford not to believe. Clara opened a folder labeled Voss Holdings. Her eyes scanned line after line of financial statements, wire transfers, and shell corporations. And then she saw it, Monroe & Co. Her breath caught. Isla Monroe wasn't just a mistress. She was a piece in the machine, an investor, a name threaded through offshore entities, luxury properties, and discreet account transfers. Clara's fingers danced furiously across the keyboard, cross-referencing names, dates, and transactions. What she found made her stomach turn: deposits, lining up too perfectly with Nathaniel's recent mergers, transfers funneled through Isla's family trusts, assets purchased under false names. This wasn't just adultery. It was corruption. It was fraud. And it was intentional. She stood suddenly, pacing across the cold marble floor. Fury coursed through her, but it wasn't loud. It was steady, deep, and purposeful. She had spent years uncovering the sins of men like Nathaniel, men who thought charm was a shield and wealth was a weapon. And now, fate had handed her the most personal case of all. She picked up her phone. "Nathan," she said, her voice low but unwavering, "I need your help." "Clara," he answered, concern bleeding through the line. "I saw the photos. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied quickly, "but I've found something. This goes way beyond an affair. Nathaniel's involved in something dangerous. I need to know exactly how deep it runs." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" he asked. "If we go down this path, there's no turning back." It's going to get messy. Clara's grip tightened around the phone. I'm already in it, she said, and I'm not backing out. She ended the call and stood still, letting the weight of it all sink in. The marriage she had tried to save, the image she had fought to preserve, was nothing but an illusion. Smoke and mirrors. But she wasn't here to play the broken wife anymore. No, she was going to dismantle Nathaniel Voss's empire, brick by brick. And when she was done, he wouldn't just lose her, he'd lose everything. The morning light crept into the penthouse as Clara sat quietly at the breakfast table, a fresh cup of coffee warming her hands. The city stirred beneath her, buzzing, alive, unaware that its golden boy was about to fall. The warm aroma of coffee filled the air, a small comfort in stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Clara Whitmore sat still at the breakfast table, porcelain cup in hand. But her mind was anything but still. The events of the night before replayed in agonizing clarity: Nathaniel's smirk, Isla's smug stare, the whispers, the camera flashes, the humiliation. It hadn't just been a betrayal. It had been a performance, and she had been cast as the fool. She took a slow sip of her coffee. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held her spine straight. She wouldn't break. Not yet. Across the room, Nathaniel stood by the massive windows, dressed in one of his signature tailored suits. As if nothing had happened, his posture unbothered, his expression unreadable. You didn't sleep? He said casually, voice breaking the silence like a dropped glass. Neither did you, she replied, not even glancing at him. He chuckled, stepping closer. I expected more. Fireworks, he said, pouring himself a cup. You surprised me, Clara. She met his gaze for the first time, calm, sharp, unreadable. You really think you know me that well, don't you? A flicker passed over his face, hesitation, doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it came. We've been married 8 years, he said with practiced ease. I know how you process things. You observe, you overthink, you write stories in your head, and then you let it go. It's what you do. Clara set her cup down. Her voice was quiet, steady. You're right about one thing, she said, lips curling into something between a smile and a warning. I do write stories, but this one, I'm not letting go. Nathaniel sighed, rubbing his temple. Let's not turn this into something ugly. I know you're hurt, but these things happen. We can move past it. These things? She echoed, her voice suddenly sharp. You mean affairs? Public humiliation? Or the lies you've woven into our entire life together? His tone shifted, hardening. Let's not pretend this marriage was perfect. You've always been more committed to your work than to us. And frankly, you're not the easiest person to love, Clara. There it was. The pivot, the blame, the rewrite of their history. Clara stood, slowly, her voice low but cutting. You're right, I'm not easy to love, but at least I know the difference between love and control. You don't. He clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked past him. He thought this was over, that he had won, that his power could erase the damage like it always had. He was wrong. Later that afternoon, Clara sat in her private office at the Post, eyes locked on her laptop screen. Her fingers moved fast, drawing connections she had once tried to ignore. Suspicion had lingered for weeks, quiet, growing. Now it was clear Nathaniel Voss had built a wall of secrecy around his empire, and she was starting to break it down. His deals were always complicated, too complicated. Investments passed through layers of shell companies, anonymous purchases, offshore accounts tied to names that, when examined carefully, all looped back to him. And then there was Isla Monroe. She wasn't just a fling, she was a financial instrument. Luxury cars, sudden property ownership, a sharp increase in net worth. It wasn't a coincidence, it was laundering. She was being used to move money, to hide something. Clara leaned back, staring at the screen. A bitter chill settled in her chest. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was criminal. Just then, a knock echoed at her door. A knock at the door pulled Clara from her thoughts. Nathan Cole stepped inside, his usual calm replaced with a grim expression. "I got your message," he said, closing the door softly behind him. "What's going on?" Clara exhaled sharply and motioned him over. "Nathaniel," she said, voice clipped. She turned her laptop screen toward him. "I think he's laundering money through the company, and he's using Isla." Nathan's brows furrowed as he leaned in, scanning the files. "Jesus, Clara." This could destroy him. I know. Her voice was steady, jaw tight. "But I need more. Something concrete. Something irrefutable." Nathan studied her for a long moment, the weight of the situation pressing into the silence between them. "Look," he said finally, voice low. "I get it, I do. But this is dangerous ground. If Nathaniel catches wind of what you're doing, this won't stay clean." Clara held his gaze, unwavering. "It's already dirty, Nathan. I'm just not pretending anymore." He nodded slowly, resigned. "All right, I'll make some calls. I'll dig into his offshore holdings." "But Clara," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "you know what kind of man he really is." She nodded. She knew. Nathaniel Voss wasn't just a powerful man. He was a tactician, a man who moved people like chess pieces, and he never hesitated to remove the ones that stood in his way. But this time, Clara was ready to be the one who made the first move. That evening, Clara returned home to find Nathaniel alone in the living room, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, the city lights casting a cold glow across his face. He turned as she entered, studying her in that way he always had, like he was trying to read her next move. "You're quiet tonight," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "Planning something?" Clara gave a faint smile, her voice light but firm. "Just thinking. You've given me a lot to reflect on." He chuckled, leaning back into the couch. "I hope you're not turning this into one of your little exposés," he said, mockingly. "That would be unfortunate." She stepped closer, gaze locked on his, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fear buried beneath the arrogance. "Oh, don't worry," she murmured. "When I write, I only write the truth." Nathaniel's face tightened. "Clara," he said, voice low, "you know how this game works? I wouldn't push me, if I were you." She didn't flinch. "Then maybe," she said, her voice like glass, "you should have thought twice before making a fool of me." She turned, heels echoing against the marble floor as she walked away, leaving him in the stillness, her words sinking like anchors. In that moment, she knew there was no going back. Later that night, the glow of Clara's laptop washed across her face. She scrolled through spreadsheets, foreign transfers, shell corporations, and fake signatures, all pieces in the puzzle of Nathaniel's empire of deceit. She had spent her life dissecting the lies of the rich and powerful. But this time, it wasn't just about justice. It was personal. A soft knock interrupted her focus. Nathan stepped in again, this time with a thick manila folder in one hand and a steaming coffee in the other. He placed both on her desk, then leaned over her shoulder, eyes scanning the data she had pulled up. "This is bigger than I thought," he murmured. "Nathaniel's not just shifting money, he's laundering it through a network of shell companies. And Isla," he paused, his voice dropping, "she's not just involved. She's the face, the front. Clara, he's in deep with people who don't play by the rules." Nathan's voice was low, laced with a concern that made Clara's stomach twist. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing in a breath to steady the storm inside. "I had a feeling," she murmured, her fingers already flipping through the pages of the thick folder in front of her. She stopped at a document, tapping it with quiet precision. Look at this. These properties technically owned by Isla. But the funding? It's coming directly from Voss Global accounts. He's using her, Nathan. She's not just involved, she's complicit. Nathan ran a hand across his temple, the tension in his face deepening. Clara, this isn't about betrayal anymore. This is money laundering, tax evasion, corporate fraud. If you go public with this, it'll destroy him. Her lips pressed into a thin, unsympathetic line. Good. Her voice was cold, clear. He didn't just cheat. He didn't just lie. He turned my life into a circus. A joke. But this is how I take it back. Nathan exhaled, clearly torn. I get it. I do. But Nathaniel Voss today isn't the man you married 8 years ago. He'll fight dirty. He'll try to bury you. Clara's eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something sharper. Let him try. Nathan studied her for a long beat, then nodded. All right. What's the next move? Clara stood and walked to the window, arms folded as the city flickered beneath her like a restless tide. I can't release it all at once. He'll send his legal team in to crush it. No, I need to seed the story. Slowly. Strategically. Create doubt. Stir the press. Force him to react. Nathan gave a dry chuckle. Classic Whitmore. Always playing chess when the rest of us are still figuring out the checkers. She turned to him with a glint in her eyes. Exactly. And Nathaniel still thinks I'm playing by his rules. That evening, the tension at the dinner table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara sat opposite Nathaniel, her posture calm, almost detached. He looked up from his wine, voice too casual. You've been busy today. She met his gaze, her smile polite, unreadable. Work keeps me occupied. You'd know something about that, wouldn't you? There was steel beneath the words. Nathaniel chuckled, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. Come on, Clara. Let's not pretend we're strangers. We both know how this works. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Do we? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm just now meeting the man I married. For a brief moment, his mask slipped, a crack, but he recovered quickly. You always loved digging for dirt, he said, tone smooth as glass. It's in your blood. But not everything needs to be unearthed. Clara leaned in slightly, voice velvet soft. And some things have a way of rising on their own, no matter how deep you bury them. His jaw tightened. She saw it, and for the first time, he didn't look so sure. In the days that followed, Clara moved with precision. Anonymous tips, whispered details, documents shared with a few trusted reporters who knew how to stir the right waters without revealing the source. A questionable offshore account here, a suspicious land purchase there, just enough to make people start asking questions. She watched the news circuits light up, watched Nathaniel take frantic phone calls during dinner, watched him slowly unravel. One night, as he slammed his phone onto the marble counter, Clara looked up from her book, feigning mild curiosity. Trouble at work? She asked, voice light, almost amused. Nathaniel turned sharply. His eyes narrowed. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The edge in his voice was unmistakable, but Clara Whitmore just shrugged, offering a faint, unreadable smile. Why would I? She said calmly. Your business affairs never interested me. Until now. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. You're playing a dangerous game, Clara. She leaned back in her chair, meeting his gaze head on. No, Nathaniel. You started this game. I'm just making sure I'm the one who finishes it. A few days later, Clara sat in the back corner of a quiet downtown cafe where the low murmur of other conversations gave them cover. Nathan slid a small USB drive across the table, his expression grim. Everything you asked for his offshore accounts, hidden assets, fake corporations. It's all here. Clara picked up the drive, turning it slowly between her fingers. It was so small, so simple, and yet it carried the weight of everything. This, this could bring him down, Nathan said quietly. If it gets out, there's no recovering from this. Voss Global will crumble. Clara nodded, but her throat felt tight. This was it, the culmination of years of lies, of betrayal, of humiliation. And now, she had the chance to take away the only thing Nathaniel ever truly valued his legacy. But something flickered inside her, a hesitation, a whisper. Did she want to destroy him, or did she just want him to feel what she had felt all this time? Nathan watched her closely. You okay? Clara slipped the drive into her purse and gave him a thin smile. I will be. That night, she entered the penthouse to find Nathaniel waiting in the shadows of the dimly lit living room. He looked up as she closed the door behind her. You've been busy, he said, voice even. She met his eyes, unflinching. So have you. He stood, the whiskey glass in his hand catching the soft light. His voice dropped. We don't have to do this, Clara. You can walk away. We both can. She felt the tightness in her chest grow sharper, but her voice stayed calm. And let you win? She shook her head. That's not how this ends. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. Then you should know. I don't lose. Clara gave him a small, dangerous smile. Neither do I. As she walked past him, she could feel his stare pressing into her back. But for the first time in a long time, she was the one in control. Later, she stood by the towering window, the city sprawling endlessly below, like a galaxy made of steel and light. But Clara wasn't looking at the view. She was standing at the edge of a decision that would change everything. She held the power now, the proof, the truth. She had spent her life chasing corruption, exposing it, dissecting it. But this time, the monster lived in her own home. Every wire transfer, every fake shell company, every lie carefully constructed over years. And now she could destroy it all. But doing so meant burning down what little remained, of their marriage, of their shared past, of the illusion they had once both believed in. Behind her, she heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate. In the glass, his reflection appeared beside hers, that same smirk. But now, there was something new in his eyes. Worry? You've been quiet, Nathaniel said, swirling the amber liquid. Should I be concerned? Clara turned toward him slowly, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Should you? He chuckled, but the sound was brittle. He was starting to feel it. The cracks, the shift, the power leaving his hands and settling into hers. You've always been clever, Nathaniel said, taking a slow sip of whiskey. But not clever enough for this game. His eyes stayed locked on Clara's, a flicker of something darker behind his gaze. If you're planning something, just say it. Clara stepped forward, her heels whispering against the marble floor. She stopped just inches from him. What if I told you, she said softly, that I already did? His jaw tightened barely, but she caught it. He set his glass down with an audible clink, the tension in his body suddenly louder than his words. I see, he said slowly. And what exactly have you done? Clara crossed her arms, leaning against the window behind her, the skyline casting faint reflections across the glass. I've been asking myself the same thing, Nathaniel. What have you done? Offshore accounts, shell companies, money routed through Isla Monroe's name, transactions hidden in plain sight. Her voice remained calm, but each word hit its target like a knife. Nathaniel didn't speak, but she could see it, the gears turning, the mask slipping. Finally, he exhaled through his nose and leaned against the bar, feigning composure. You should have been a lawyer, he said, voice laced with false amusement. You're quite good at making claims without proof. Clara smiled faintly, then pulled her phone from her pocket. She tapped once, then held it up for him to see. "Oh, I have proof," she said coolly. "Would you like to see it? Or should I just forward it to my editor at the Post?" For the first time in years, Nathaniel Voss paled. "You wouldn't," he said, but his voice lacked certainty. Clara tilted her head. "Wouldn't I? You, of all people, should know I don't bluff." The air between them thickened like fog. His jaw clenched hard, a vein flickering in his temple. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice low, tightly controlled. Clara stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose, to feel powerless, to watch everything you built collapse around you while you're helpless to stop it." She studied his face, and for the first time, she saw it real fear. Not for his life, but for his name, his empire. Nathaniel Voss wasn't afraid of scandal. He was afraid of irrelevance, but he wasn't going down without a fight. "You think you're clever," he muttered, "but you're playing with fire, Clara." She didn't blink. "Then I guess," she said, "I'll have to make sure I don't get burned." The next few days were a calculated ballet of destruction. Clara released information in fragments leaks to trusted journalists, anonymous tips to watchdogs, and whispers to the right investors. Nothing that screamed scandal, just enough to make them wonder, doubt, pull back. Nathaniel's world began to tremble at the edges. Emergency meetings, nervous board members, investor unrest, and Clara watched it all from the shadows, savoring every crack as it spread. One evening, her phone buzzed. Nathan's voice came through, breathless with restrained triumph. "It's working," he said. "Rumors are spreading. His board's starting to question his leadership. You've got them rattled." Clara allowed herself a quiet, measured smile. "Good," she said, "but we're not done yet." Nathan paused. "Clara, are you sure you want to go through with this? There's no turning back after this. Once it's out, it's out." She stood by the window, the city glowing beneath her, 1,000 lights blinking like signals from another world. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." At home, Nathaniel's temper had started to fray. He watched her every move, now suspicious, on edge. And Clara? She simply sipped her tea, smiled when necessary, and waited for the empire to fall. Nathaniel had become quietly suspicious, watching Clara with the precision of a man afraid of what he might find. He didn't ask directly, but his gaze lingered longer. His smiles were thinner, his questions carefully worded traps. Clara, in turn, played her part. She smiled at breakfast, answered casually, laughed when expected, but sometimes, across the table, she'd catch him staring his eyes, searching, calculating, trying to measure how much she really knew. The truth was simple. She knew everything. Late one evening, Clara sat on the balcony with a glass of red wine, her legs curled beneath her, the wind brushing against her skin. Behind her, footsteps. Nathaniel's silhouette appeared, shadowed by the city lights. He stood in silence for a moment, then spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Clara, why are you doing this?" She didn't turn. Just let the breeze wash over her, swirling the wine in her glass like a storm held still. "Because you left me no choice," she said quietly. He exhaled, rubbing a hand through his hair. "You could have walked away." Clara finally turned to him, her eyes cold, unwavering. "And let you get away with all of it?" She shook her head. "No, Nathaniel, that's not who I am." He stared at her, something like regret flickering in his gaze, but Clara knew better. Men like him didn't regret what they did, only the moment they got caught. "You should be careful," he said, tone soft but lined with warning. "There are things you don't understand." Clara stood slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you brought your mistress to our anniversary gala." Nathaniel smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've always been a fighter," he said, voice turning cold. But let me remind you, fights have consequences. Clara leaned in, just slightly, her voice a whisper laced with steel. So do betrayals. She walked past him without another word, and he stood alone on that balcony, unaware just how much he had already lost. The newsroom at the Post buzzed with its usual chaos, ringing phones, clacking keyboards, editors shouting across desks. But Clara sat in complete stillness at her desk. The article glowed on her screen. Final draft. Headline bold and undeniable. Inside Voss Global. A web of deceit, fraud, and betrayal. Her cursor hovered over the publish button. Years of anger, months of research, days of silence. This was the moment. One click, and the truth would be unleashed. Beside her, Nathan appeared, leaning on her desk with a cautious expression. You sure? He asked gently. Once this goes live. It's war. Claire didn't blink. It already is. He rubbed the back of his neck. I know he hurt you, but this isn't just about him anymore. The moment this hits, people will come for you too. Dig into your past, your choices. Clara gave a bitter smile. Let them. I've got nothing to hide. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. Just know, when Voss Global falls, Nathaniel won't go quietly. She turned back to her screen. Let him try. And then she clicked. The fallout was immediate. Within the hour, the article had exploded online. Finance outlets picked it up. Social media buzzed. Hashtags trended. Voss Global stock plummeted. Panicked investors pulled out. Reporters swarmed the company headquarters. Cameras stationed outside their penthouse. Questions shouted at anyone who passed by. And Clara? She sat in her office, back straight, eyes on the screen. Calm, unshaken, powerful, because the storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. Clara's phone buzzed with a relentless flood of notifications messages, headlines, breaking news, but she ignored them. Instead, she opened her email. Dozens of new messages had come in from anonymous sources, former employees, whistleblowers, even distant acquaintances of Nathaniel Voss, all offering their own piece of the puzzle. It had begun, and there was no turning back. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse, her breath steady. The truth was finally out. Back at the penthouse, Nathaniel stormed through the front door, rage radiating from every step. Clara sat calmly on the couch, a glass of wine resting elegantly in her hand. You think this is funny? He hissed, tossing a printed copy of her article onto the coffee table. The headline practically screamed off the page, Inside the Fall of Voss Global. Clara took a slow sip, savoring the moment like a fine vintage. Not funny, she said, setting the glass down. Necessary. Nathaniel clenched his jaw, pacing like a caged animal. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything I built. Her gaze never wavered. I exposed the truth. There's a difference. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You think you're some kind of hero? You're no better than the people you write about. Clara tilted her head, unfazed. Maybe, but at least I'm honest about it. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. They're freezing my accounts. Clients are backing out. My legal team is in meltdown. Clara crossed her legs and leaned back. Good. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to have your world ripped out from under you. Nathaniel stopped pacing, glaring at her, breath ragged. You wanted revenge? Congratulations. You got it. Clara's voice dropped quiet, sharp. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. For a moment, he was silent, just standing there, staring at her like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, what are you going to do now? Burn it all down? She stood, adjusting her dress, calm as ever. I don't have to. You're doing that all by yourself. And she walked past him, leaving him in the wreckage of his own empire. Over the next few days, Clara's exposé continued to unfold like a carefully pulled thread unraveling an empire. More women came forward. Former staff leaked damning emails. Regulators launched official investigations on what had once been Nathaniel's kingdom was now a cautionary tale. But Clara wasn't finished. One evening, she sat beneath the glare of studio lights for an exclusive interview with a prominent news anchor, poised, grounded, radiating quiet strength. "Why did you do it?" the anchor asked. "Why expose your own husband?" Clara took a breath, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering. "Because truth matters, because men like Nathaniel Voss thrive on deception, and we've let them get away with it for far too long." A pause. "Do you regret it?" She gave a small, thoughtful smile. "No," she said. "I regret not doing it sooner." The segment aired that same night, and it changed everything. Clara Whitmore became a symbol of fearless accountability. To some, she was a hero. To others, a threat. But to all, she was respected. Meanwhile, Nathaniel crumbled. One late night, Claire returned to the penthouse to find him alone in the dark, slouched in his chair, glass in hand. His once pristine suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. The man who once held the room with a glance now looked small. "You got what you wanted," he said hoarsely. "Are you happy now?" Clara stood for a long moment, watching him, the man she once loved, and the man who tore it all apart. "I didn't do this to be happy, Nathaniel," she said quietly. "I did it to be free." "Free?" Claire repeated softly, more to herself than to him. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his disheveled hair. "And now what? You move on, while I'm left picking up the pieces?" Clara walked over slowly, stopping just beside him. "I warned you," she said quietly. "You should have never underestimated me." He looked up at her, then, and for the first time, she saw it. Not anger, not arrogance, but something raw, defeat, regret, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of admiration. But it didn't matter anymore. It was too late. With one final glance, Clara turned and walked away, her heels echoing through the silence of the room, leaving Nathaniel behind, in the dark, with his empire collapsing around him. The scandal would rage on. The headlines would multiply. But for Clara Whitmore, it was over. She had taken back her voice, her power, her name. And as she stepped out into the crisp night air, a quiet breeze brushing against her cheeks, she felt something she hadn't known in years: relief. Nathaniel Voss had tried to humiliate her in front of the world. He thought he would walk away untouched. He was wrong. And Clara Whitmore? She was just getting started. At the Post, Clara stood before the massive newsroom window, staring down at the city that once dazzled her. It was the same skyline, but through new eyes, it looked different. The streets buzzed, unaware that the world they knew was shifting beneath them. Voss Global, once untouchable, was unraveling in real time, and Clara had front-row seats to its destruction. The fallout was swift and brutal. Her exposé had ignited an avalanche of investigations. Government agencies opened files, shareholders panicked. Reporters dissected every corner of Nathaniel's career. News anchors spoke with polished detachment, but Clara saw the truth in their eyes, a quiet satisfaction, a hunger for the fall of the mighty. Then her phone buzzed. She reached for it, glancing at the screen. Nathan. Still hiding from the spotlight, his voice crackled through the speaker. "Still keeping low, Carter?" "I'm not hiding," she replied, her tone even. "I'm observing." Nathan sighed. "Nathaniel's pulling every string he has. He's calling in favors, pressuring editors, spinning a new narrative. His team is painting you as the bitter wife, out for revenge. Clara let out a dry laugh. Let them. I have something stronger than opinion facts. Facts don't always win, Clara, Nathan warned. Perception is louder. She crossed her arms, staring out at the world below. Let them dig. They'll find exactly what I want them to find, Nathan chuckled. You really are something else, Whitmore. That's why you love me, she said, without missing a beat, though her voice held no flirtation this time. Only quiet determination. Send me everything. I want to know his next move, already on it, Nathan said before hanging up. Clara sat back at her desk, the soft glow of the screen lighting her face. Spreadsheets, bank reports, leaks. She had laid bare every dark corner of Nathaniel's empire. But she knew him. He wasn't done. Control was his oxygen, and she had taken it away. Now this was no longer about exposure. It was about survival. Across town, in a corner office once known for power and pristine control, Nathaniel Voss sat with his legal team. The air was thick with urgency. Papers scattered, voices overlapping, legal terms spilling like blood on the carpet. We need to hit back hard, one lawyer insisted. We're bleeding money. The narrative is killing us. Nathaniel leaned back, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the mahogany desk. He was never built to defend. He was built to dominate. And now? Clara had turned the game on him. His mind raced not with regret, but with options. He could spin this. He had to. Nathaniel Voss was cornered, but he wasn't finished. If he couldn't win in silence, he'd fight in the spotlight. And the public? They loved a redemption arc. He paced in his office, still surrounded by his legal team, rage barely restrained. She's not done, he snapped, and neither am I. Then he turned sharply toward his chief advisor. Find something on her. Anything. I want dirt old mistakes, bad decisions, whatever we can use to destroy her credibility. Mark hesitated. We've started digging, but Clara Whitmore is clean. Her reputation's bulletproof. There's nothing that sticks. Nathaniel's jaw tensed. Everyone has skeletons. Keep digging. But deep down, he knew better. Clara was meticulous. She didn't play unless she already knew the end game. Meanwhile, Clara began to feel the slow erosion of the world she once knew. Friends stopped returning her calls. Invitations vanished from her inbox. The elite circles she once belonged to now treated her like a scandal too loud, too visible. But she didn't care. She hadn't burned bridges. She had walked away with the match in her hand. One afternoon, she wandered through Central Park, letting the wind clear her thoughts. A voice behind her cut through the quiet. Clara. She turned and froze. Isla Monroe. But the woman standing before her was barely recognizable. No designer gown, no glamour, just tired eyes, nervous hands, and a thread of desperation in her voice. I figured you'd come find me eventually, Clara said, her tone cool and guarded. Isla shifted her weight uneasily. You don't understand, she said. Nathaniel, he's dangerous. And now that you've exposed him, he's going to come for you. Clara raised an eyebrow. Let him, she said. He's already taken enough. It's time he learned what it feels like. Isla hesitated. You think you're safe because you told the truth, but you don't know what he's capable of. He has connections, real ones. People who don't play by any rules. Clara's confidence wavered for a second. There was something raw in Isla's voice. Not drama, fear, but she couldn't show it. Not now. You made your choice, Clara replied, her voice firm. Enjoy the consequences. Isla's eyes narrowed. I just hope you know what you're doing, because he won't stop until you're ruined. As she walked away, her heels echoing on the path, Clara's fingers tightened around her phone. Her pulse quickened. But her resolve? Still solid. The next morning, Clara stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by a sea of flashing cameras and shouting voices. Reporters pushed microphones toward her, voices overlapping Clara. Is it true Nathaniel is countersuing for defamation? Do you regret publishing the expose? Was your article motivated by revenge? She stood tall, her expression unreadable. I'm here because the truth matters, she said clearly. Nathaniel Voss built his empire on lies. If standing here means holding him accountable, then I have no regrets. She turned to enter the courthouse, and through the chaos, their eyes met. Nathaniel stood across the plaza, flanked by his lawyers, but his signature smirk no longer held its power. He looked like a man clinging to the last thread of control. This wasn't over. But Clara wasn't the woman he once manipulated. She was stronger now, sharper, ready. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The judge entered. The gavel fell, and the next chapter began. Across the courtroom, Nathaniel Voss slouched slightly in his chair, a shadow of the man who once commanded boardrooms and headlines. His legal team whispered urgently beside him, flipping through stacks of papers, but Clara could see the cracks. This wasn't just about money or reputation anymore. This was about survival. The judge cleared her throat. The murmurs quieted. Clara straightened in her seat, inhaling deeply. This wasn't a story she was writing for others. This was her life, her name, her truth. A few days earlier, Clara had sat in her new apartment, the one-bedroom walk-up she moved into after leaving the penthouse. It was quiet, smaller, imperfect, but it felt like hers. Boxes still lined the walls, fragments of a life in transition. But in that quiet, she found peace. Nathan sat across from her, watching her sort through a mountain of legal documents. You don't have to go through with this, he said gently. You already exposed him. The world knows. Clara looked up, her eyes not angry but steady. Full of purpose. This isn't just about exposing him, Nathan. It's about accountability. He doesn't get to walk away with a bruised ego. He needs to face consequences. Nathan leaned back, rubbing his jaw. You're playing a dangerous game. Clara smiled faintly. I'm not playing anymore. I'm winning. Back in the courtroom, Nathaniel's attorney rose for his closing arguments. He spoke with calculated charm, painting Clara as the bitter ex-wife, her article fueled not by truth but vengeance. He used her voice, her past, her pain against her. Clara listened, unmoved. She had expected this. Then it was her turn. She stood, walked slowly to the front, and met the eyes of the jury one by one. For years, Nathaniel Voss was praised as a man of integrity, she began, voice calm and unwavering. He wore power like a suit, charm like a weapon. And many of us believed him. I believed him. She paused, then looked directly at Nathaniel. But beneath that shine was something darker: fraud, manipulation, deceit. This isn't about revenge, it's about truth. The same truth I've spent my career chasing on behalf of others. Nathaniel didn't just betray me. He betrayed his employees, his investors, and the very values he claimed to stand on. She let that sink in, then added, softly but firmly, I exposed him because the world deserves to know the truth even when that truth is inconvenient, even when it hurts. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I ask that this court hold Nathaniel Voss accountable, not just for me, but for every person he deceived. She returned to her seat. Nathan beside her gently squeezed her hand under the table. She didn't need reassurance, but it reminded her she wasn't alone. A week later, the ruling came in. Guilty. Nathaniel Voss was found guilty of financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. His assets were frozen. Federal investigations deepened. His name, once printed in gold, was now etched in scandal. Clara sat alone in her new office at the Post, watching the news coverage. The headlines scrolled across the screen, Voss Empire collapses amid scandal. Truth, Wins Clara Whitmore's case reshapes corporate accountability. She leaned back in her chair. The city outside buzzed on, and for the first time in years, Clara wasn't surviving. She was living. Voss Empire collapses amid scandal. The journalist who brought down a giant. The headlines flashed across the screen as Clara Whitmore leaned back in her chair, sipping the last of her coffee. It all felt surreal, not because Nathaniel had fallen, but because she had risen, stronger, wiser, more herself than she had ever been. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the moment. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Clara Whitmore, she said, her voice calm. A familiar voice came through the line. You won, Nathaniel said. There was no venom in his tone now, just quiet defeat. And maybe something else, something softer, almost human. Clara paused before replying. No, she said gently. You just finally lost. A silence stretched between them, long, heavy with things unsaid. You know, he added, there was a time when I actually loved you. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat, but her voice stayed steady. There was a time I loved who I thought you were, and with that, she ended the call, placing the phone down with a soft click that felt like closing a chapter, maybe the most important one of her life. A few weeks later, Clara sat in the sunlit corner of the same cafe where it had all begun. She stirred her tea slowly, the chaos of the past months finally settling into something quieter, something that almost felt like peace. Across from her, Nathan leaned back with a half smile. So, he asked, what's next for Clara Whitmore? She smiled, eyes glinting with a new kind of light. A new story, maybe, she said thoughtfully. Or maybe, I'll finally take that vacation I keep talking about. Nathan raised a brow. Vacation? You? Impossible. Clara laughed, really laughed. A sound full of life. A sound she hadn't let herself feel in far too long. Hey, she said, still smiling, I deserve it. And she did. She deserved the quiet, the sun, the freedom to exhale, to be more than someone's wife, more than someone's target. She was Clara Whitmore, and she was just getting started. Months later, Clara walked through the bustling halls of the Post, a quiet fire in her step. The whispers had faded, the stares had softened. She had reclaimed her name. And her next big story, already in motion. But this time, it wasn't about exposing betrayal or tearing down an empire. It was about rebirth, about the power of starting again. Because if there was one thing Clara Whitmore had learned, it was this: power doesn't come from wealth or reputation. It comes from knowing your worth. And she was worth everything.